Hey YouTube, how's it going? Well, welcome back to another video. Okay, in this video I just want to talk for a moment, just a moment of your time, about what we want as a group of people, right? As a community, right? As like black folks, right? Like what do we want when it comes to like our social movements? Because I'm not sure, but I don't think we as a community are entirely on the same page when it comes to this. Because we have to be really sure about what we want. Do we want black liberation from the system of white supremacy, right? Or white acceptance from the system of white supremacy? We have to be really clear about that, because I don't think we are entirely on the same page as a community when it comes to this. Because some people, are kind of like, it seems like they want to get white acceptance, low key, right? Usually, this is kind of like what happens when like some black people are like posturing themselves as like pro-black, or a black activist, etc., and they have a white partner. I tend to sort of get that vibe from them, and understandably, if you think about it, it makes sense, right? Since they want to just be able to be with their white partner without having to deal with like the discrimination and everything like that, right? While other times when it comes to like people with black partners, some, not all, because some be on that too, it seemed like, a lot of them tend to be more about, black liberation, right? Trying to be liberated and, becoming like a self-sustaining entity of our own. But, think about the people in the media who are, quote unquote, black activists. Does it seem like they want more so to like assimilate into whiteness and be accepted into whiteness? Or does it seem like they want to, divest from whiteness and, totally just be liberated from it and, the system of white supremacy, right? Think about it. Like, say the Black Lives Matter movement. And, I don't want to come off as if I'm bashing them, because that's not really where I'm coming from with it, and also I commend them for putting their, selves out there and doing what they do. I don't really know like a lot about the movement, but I do agree with the phrase Black Lives Matter. But think about it though. Think about that phrase for a moment. Black Lives Matter. Who are we trying to convince that Black Lives Matter? Largely white folk. But the thing is, though, if you think about it, should I have to convince you that my life matters? Shouldn't it just be a given? Shouldn't it just be obvious that my life matters? Should I have to convince you? And also, if I do have to convince you, isn't that a bad sign? That's a bad sign. If I have to convince you that my life matters. Think about all, the relationships that you have in your life. Like the relationship with, your parents, your siblings, your love interests, your coworkers, your employer, the people who you attend, your church or temple or mosque or whatever religion you follow with, right? Your friends, etc., etc., etc. Think about those relationships. Should you have to convince any of those folks that your life matters? Think about it. And if you do have to convince them, would you be like wouldn't you feel some type of a way about that? If someone just assumed your life did not matter, would you really want to fool with them? You know, in your day-to-day life, would you really want to fool with, like, say, a friend who just assumed your life didn't matter? They wouldn't. For me, that's not a friend. That wouldn't be someone I want to associate with, right? So yeah, think about that for a moment. Like, what are we trying to really get from these movements that we have, right? Also, think about the civil rights movement. And I think low key, the civil rights movement may have started off as black liberation. I think so. I may be wrong about that, though. I may be wrong. But I think it may have initially started off as that. Maybe. I'm not sure. But then it came, once we started, incorporating other groups of people into our movements, and it got hijacked, right? Then it turned into like a whole, multicultural kumbaya, whatever you want to call it. All right. Yeah. Ultimately, it just turned into white acceptance at that point. Like, we just want white folks to accept us. We just want to be able to eat at the same restaurants as the white folks, right? We just want to be able to go to the same schools as the white folks, right? We just want to be able to drink from the same water fountain as white folks, right? When the movement should have been centered around, we want to have our own schools, which I think we did, but they just weren't up to par or something. We want to have our own water fountains. We want to have our own restaurants, which we did, which we did. And I understand a little, at least partially, where they're coming from with that, because at least when it comes to like government buildings and things like that, black people's tax dollars did help finance that, right? So I think when it comes to like the government aspect of it, yes, we should be allowed that, because our money did finance that. We did pay the taxes to finance the schools, the libraries, the courthouses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? But I think we kind of got, pushed off course or led off course somehow when it came to that situation. And, I'm not coming from like some place of like judgment, acting like I'm so much better. I definitely commend the people who participated in the civil rights movement. But I'm just saying we can just learn some things from the civil rights movement, right? We can learn from that so we don't make the same mistake again. We thought that integration was going to just end all the issues, but it didn't work like that, right? It ended up, ending some issues, but creating new issues, right? Like, it ended, like, say, issues with education, perhaps, but then you can argue that it didn't. But at least black people have access to the same, to all educational institutes, right? So their social mobility and education is not so stifled, right? Although we did have our own schools and our own colleges too, but another story. But like I said, there's some things that perhaps we can say, like, it was a win, but then some things it created new problems. We had the old problems that may have went away, but then we just exchanged them for a new set of problems, right? Like, say, more interracial dating, right? And some people are going to feel some type of a way about that, but I think that if segregation had continued, interracial dating would not be so prevalent, right? And you wouldn't see it as much. But to be fair, it did happen during segregation too. But it seemed like it exacerbated the problem, right? We just exchanged lynchings for police brutality, right? And also, it just seemed like we may have exchanged our black businesses that we had and that we did support as black people because, we just honestly just didn't have a choice because the white places weren't doing, treating us right and wanting the service, et cetera, et cetera. It just seemed like we just exchanged the black businesses, a lot of them, just for white businesses, you know? And I think that is a big part of why integration probably did happen, because look at the money, right? The money used to stay in the community a lot longer during segregation, but now it doesn't stay in the community as long, right? Just think about it. Like, why now? Why do in segregation? Um, from a white person, from white folks' perspective, why in segregation? You know, it's usually about the money when it boils down to a lot of this stuff. It usually is about the money, right? Yeah. Um, but I say all that to just say, like, black liberation versus white acceptance. Like, I don't, what more can we do to get acceptance from these folks? And at the same time, do we really want acceptance from these folks at this point? Considering our history, should we really want to really be around these folks like that? Think about it. Come on, think about it for a moment. And honestly, I think it should be the other way around. I think that white people should be asking for our acceptance and our forgiveness. If anyone's, you know, pursuing something, I don't think we should be pursuing them, right? Honestly, I think the civil rights movement should have been started by white people if they wanted it to be like a whole multicultural kumbaya thing. Yeah, it should have been, right? But then you also got to know that the system of white supremacy does not want black liberation. They want black people to be vying for their acceptance, right? Because it feeds into the lie of white supremacy. Like, oh, these black folks they just love us so much. They want to, marry us and eat at the same restaurants as we do, have kids with us, work alongside of us, right? Think about how that really feeds into the ego of somebody, right? But on the other hand, say a group like the Black Panthers, right? They were more on the black liberation tip. And that's why, you know, the government was like, no, we got to put a stop to this, right? We got to put a stop to this. No, right? They ain't trying to hear that. They're going to clamp down and shut this movement down. That system of white supremacy does not want to see black liberation. They do not want to see black people go their own way either. As much as they probably don't like black people. It's a weird psychological thing. It's like a strong hate, but there's a thin line between love and hate. You know that, right? You can hate something so much you love it, and you can love something so much you hate it. But I'm afraid that it just seems like many of us haven't learned the lesson that we should have learned from the civil rights movement. I don't know. I just don't think we learned that lesson yet as a community. I know on an individual level, yeah. And also, I think that a lot of black people are kind of like invested in white supremacy to an extent because white supremacy has given them a nice check. Let's be real. And they're looking at this check and like, okay, this is pretty nice. That's pretty nice. So they might not want to give it up for something that is a little scary to them. And also, you have not seen it, right? You have not seen black liberation like that, right? So you're thinking, should I exchange this for something that doesn't exist or that may not exist? I mean, that's why the civil rights movement had to take place in Alabama versus Atlanta, because, Martin was from Atlanta, but a lot of people were kind of like somewhat invested. A lot of black people were somewhat invested in the system, so they had to go to Alabama because the black people there were not even let into the system, right? And I just think now we're kind of just at a point where we're kind of like, a lot of folks have fed into the system and have become invested in it and have received nice checks for it. So they're like, I don't, they're not so quick to, want to just throw it away, right? And as well, I know, like, we do have obligations, we do have bills, we have things that require money. So I'm not just going to be sitting up here and saying, oh, you just have to just throw it away, like, I know, like, we gotta pay bills, we got things to do, but I just think it's something to think about, though, right? Because I know it's not just the easiest thing to divest from the system. Some people can do it, some people can't, or at least as easily. Some people can do it really easily because they're probably not in it, and some people, it's probably more of a struggle. But the overall point of me making this video is just to get us just to start thinking a little bit, right? Do we want a piece of the pie and a seat at the table, or do we want our own pie and our own table, right? Because low-key, I think we did have that during segregation. The pie and the table may not have been as opulent and as luxurious and as fancy as white folks, but if we had put our resources together, I think it probably could have been that and more, had we just, stay where we at. So I went on for a little longer than I expected. My bad. I'm going to bring this video to a close. So thanks for watching. Feel free to let me know what you think in the comments section. Until the next video, adios and goodbye for now.